Welcome back to Financial Fortitude, the podcast where we help high earners and future retirees make smarter decisions today without sabotaging their tomorrow. I'm your host, Michael Acosta, joined by co-host Brady Hemmerly.
Today we're diving into something that everyone thinks about after it's too late: emergency planning. Whether it's a job loss, sudden illness, natural disaster, or a surprise expense like the HVAC going out mid-July, the question is, are you financially ready when life throws you a curveball?
This episode is about building a proactive game plan, not just for the what ifs, but the when it happens, because it will. Welcome to Financial Fortitude, a podcast for high earners, families, and business owners. We are your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady Hemmerly. Each week we bring purpose-driven financial guidance to you so you can be assured you're on the right path. If you're looking to become an extraordinary wealth builder, let's dive in. Michael, I'm excited for our episode today because surprisingly we have not had a discussion about emergency fund or emergency fund planning. We've talked about a number of topics that are, I would say, a little bit more complex than just what is the right emergency fund, how to strategize, what to consider. So this should be a good one because it's a topic that's evergreen across any client that we come across.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I am shocked, just like you, that we haven't had a dedicated episode where we just really break down what an emergency fund is or how to prepare adequately for those what if moments. And this is something that comes up often, especially when we meet with clients and the ones who on the surface level look like they have it all together, right? They're saving well, they're putting money in great places, but maybe they're just not segmenting it the right way, or there's not enough intentionality around why they're doing the things that they're doing. They just know that they have done this up to this point.
Yeah, and it's one of those that gets swept under the rug a little bit. Like, hey, I've got my 3 to 6 months in savings, or maybe I don't, but I've just never really needed them up to this point. So it's not something I've ever really thought of in my comprehensive plan. So I would say that the effort of today's conversation is to dig into a better understanding of, hey, what's the right equation or perhaps formula or some considerations in how you should be building your emergency fund, where you should be putting those emergency fund dollars, and then how to integrate the rest of the plan into the overall approach.
Yeah, because this is foundational, right? This is the beginning. I feel like this is the precipice of the financial plan itself. If we don't have emergency funds set aside, if we don't have risk-free cash on hand, it makes planning in general a lot more difficult because you're always looking around the corner for that curveball, that what if, that life wants to throw at us that we know can show up time and time again. So let's talk about it. What is an emergency fund, and do we have some guidelines or some sort of quote-unquote formula that we present to clients during our engagements?
So emergency fund, I'd say, is pretty simple. It is liquid dollars that you can access quickly for any of life's either knowns or unknowns. If something comes up in my world in which I either wasn't expecting or perhaps was expecting but just wasn't exactly sure when it may happen, it's cash that I can get to quickly that does not disrupt the rest of my plan: savings, investing, building what is the future plan that I have in place.
Got you. So if I understand correctly, it's money set aside, exposed to very little risk, but it's accessible. Now, would you say that there's different tiers or different levels of liquidity and again, for those who may not be as familiar with that terminology, another way of explaining liquidity is how quickly can I convert something that I own, an asset that I have, into cash. And so in your mind, there's likely, I imagine, different levels of liquidity.
Oh, certainly. Yep. I think the easiest one is your checking account. I know for a fact that I can get to my checking account today, either to write a check or to transfer money, Venmo money to someone that may or may not need it. Savings account would be similar, although it is one step removed from my spending account. And then there's additional levels of liquidity, what might look like a high yield savings account, a brokerage account with cash or money markets in it. Options that are still low risk and I can still access, but it may take an extra day or day and a half to get to before the funds show up. Beyond that, there are things like lines of credit, other additional sources that we could get to. So all things that we'll talk about here today. Michael, when someone comes to you and their typical questions on emergency fund, what's the right amount, where should it be? Where do typically you like to start that conversation? Whether you know the client well or maybe it's your first time having this conversation.
Yeah, I always like to refer back to our training, right? Which both you and I being certified financial planners, the CFP board gives strong guidance in our education and curriculum and training of, if you're a single income household, then you should likely be closer to or try to have as much as 6 months worth of living expenses and risk-free cash. If it's a dual income household or someone who's okay accepting more risk, 3 months worth of living expenses is fine as far as an emergency fund or risk-free cash. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to be on hand or in your mattress, right? Something that's in a bank account, but we like to view it as being segmented, unplugged from your lifestyle, meaning that, very often we'll come across individuals who have 3 months or 6 months worth of living expenses set aside, but it's all commingled in their checking account. And that's not initially problematic, but by segmenting it out and having a true spending account, which would be your checking account, and then a true emergency fund or savings account, it helps to provide clarity to the overall plan and where you're at today.
So let me ask you this question. Let's say a client comes to you and I and they say, hey, I've never really kept an emergency fund. Up to this point, I have simply invested all of the excess money that I have. I want it to grow. Or maybe, hey, I've had challenges capturing extra cash flow. I spend a lot of the money that I have in my bank instead of keeping it as an emergency fund. Why is someone keeping it? If I'm the investor, the person who is not great at spending, why is it important to have an emergency fund and segment it elsewhere?
Yeah, the importance is because of the what ifs, right? Or the unknowns, or we all know life likes to happen without our direct control, right? The curveballs that's often used as an example. And so things can happen. There's job volatility. Whenever there's a recession, people lose jobs, people get laid off. And so if you are a single income household, and let's just say that you're married and their dependents, well, there's a lot more pressure put on you. So having more risk-free cash or liquidity on hand, funds that are accessible in a timely manner or in an emergency, can eliminate a lot of stress and just offer a lot of fortitude or deepen that moat around your financial balance sheet that we often refer to. If you have the opportunity to go buy a investment rental property, having the extra liquidity on hand is going to be helpful, especially if you're not having to pull funds from accounts that you're technically locked out of until age 59 and a half, or being penalized for early withdrawal and additional taxation if it's pre-tax, right? So the more cash or liquidity you have on hand, my opinion is that you have more optionality and more control over the decisions that you can make, whether it's a positive or a negative life event that arises.
I'd agree. What I tell a lot of individuals that we speak to is an emergency fund is essentially you purchasing time, flexibility, and options when it comes to making a decision, either for better or for worse. Hey, I've lost my job. All right, how much time have you bought yourself to go out and look for a new one? 3 months worth of time, 6 months worth of time, 12 months worth of time? Hey, I've got an unexpected medical expense that pops up. All right, how much time have you bought to take off of work, to address it without interrupting the rest of your investments, to tackle what is an unknown without a poor tax implication, etc.?
Yeah, and I've seen it time and time again with clients on both sides of the spectrum where we had the medical professional who's married, wife is at home with first child, and unexpectedly gets laid off from a clinic, right? Well, because we had done such a great job at proactively planning and they were really great at saving money, just based on the cash flow design that we created together, there was more than enough income or more than enough savings set aside for them to cover their living expenses and allow the husband to go out and find his next role with a clinic that aligned with his values and gave him the opportunity that he was excited about versus just going and taking the next job opportunity for the sake of having income. And so having, like you said, having that extra liquidity made it helpful in that situation and eliminated a lot of the stress, maybe not all of it, because not having a job isn't fun, right? Especially when it's unexpected. But I've also seen the other side where, hey, I'm having to go do something that I wouldn't normally want to do from an occupational standpoint just to have income come in to supplement because maybe I haven't been able to proactively plan or maybe I didn't take the appropriate steps. So, obviously the more that we have available to us, the more flexibility that we have. Now, the other thing that I'll say is that I almost like, and it's more or less a play on words, but I almost would rather call it a life events fund as opposed to an emergency fund. Because I feel like an emergency fund really pigeonholes it into whenever it's a dire need or something that's got a negative connotation. Whereas if it's a life events fund, there are both positive and negative life events that arise that would warrant having quick access to liquidity or quick access to cash.
So let's use that terminology moving forward. So standard advice says, hey, I should keep somewhere between 3 to 6 months in my life events fund. What would you say, knowing a lot of times each financial plan is individual, each financial plan is custom built, and everyone's world looks a little bit different? As we are designing plans that have a bit of that artful taste, just as much of the scientific taste, what are some of the considerations to think through that may guide an emergency fund in one direction, either closer towards 3 months, right at that 3 to 6 months, or maybe even more? What are some different things that individuals should consider?
Yeah, I would say overall occupation. So if you're a W-2 employee with consistent, stable salary or income, and a large portion of your annual income isn't tied to incentive compensation or quarterly bonuses or commissions or anything like that, then you might be willing to take on a little bit more risk and say, hey, I only want to keep about 3 months in risk-free cash, but the rest of it I'm going to put into some sort of brokerage account, right? After-tax investment account, and take on a little bit more growth orientation, which would mean maybe a little bit more risk in the markets. For someone who's maybe self-employed, business owner, has, rental real estate, single income, multiple dependents, and their income is very variable driven, well, even if they are a riskier individual personality-wise, probably going to encourage them heavily to have a little bit more cash on hand.
Why?
Why? Because there's a lot more unknowns and a lot more unpredictable events that could arise in their life that would warrant their need for having access to that cash, whether it's to cover an expense, whether it's to go and buy inventory for their business, whether it's having to spend money on a repair for a rental to flip it for the next tenant that's going to be coming in. Maybe the past tenant didn't respect your property in the manner that you did, or maybe you're doing fully furnished rentals for people who come in every 6 to 9 months.
Life events fund there is essentially just buying you time, and it's time to address the best plan moving forward. It's time to address, hey, is the market perhaps in a good spot to take funds out of my riskier assets? I guess as a good example, hey, I'm self-employed. I'm a single income individual. My wife stays at home and is not working. And not only do I have a business, but I have a rental. I may be very risk on in my overall approach. I'm happy to invest in the stock market, to take risk in my real estate. But at the end of the day, if I don't have any liquidity or quick access cash, I could be subject to a poor outcome, not because the risk that I'm taking is bad. It's just simply, hey, the risk I'm taking, I experience a negative outcome in a time where, hey, it's not ideal for me to have to dig into my investments. It's not a time for me that it's ideal to put the real estate expansion on pause.
There are instances where, for some clients, I even like to segment the life events fund or the emergency fund into 2 different buckets, right? And it might be 2 different types of high yield savings accounts, or maybe, one's just a low interest bearing bank account that's, very accessible, ATMs everywhere, have great customer service. And then the other portion of the quote unquote life events fund is in a high yield savings account where it's all online transactions. As far as accessibility, still being relatively easy as far as writing a check, using a debit card, or doing a transfer, whatever. But segmenting it in that manner. So, let's take someone who's got the 6 months. We might put 3 months in just their primary low interest bearing checking account, and then the other 3 months in a high interest bearing online savings account. And it doesn't stop there, because I think the second focal point with building that moat from a liquidity aspect is, okay, well, how much liquidity can I have on my balance sheet? Is there ever too much? And so I think you can't have too much risk-free cash on hand, because then you're falling victim to loss of purchasing power, right? With the cost of living continuing to rise, if you're not earning enough interest to outpace that or keep lockstep with that, then your money's losing value, essentially. So that's where at some point you have to be willing to step out onto the playing field of some sort of solution that's going to offer you a little bit more yield or growth opportunity, return on investment. And so that's where we say, hey, bare minimum for life events fund, 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses based off the characteristics of your balance sheet and your household. Anything above and beyond that, once we hit that target, we don't stop building liquidity. We keep building, we keep laying bricks, right? We keep building that financial fortitude. But now we're putting it into a brokerage account or something from an investment standpoint where, hey, there's the potential where we could earn, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% hypothetically in a portfolio depending on the vehicle that we're using, and hey, the funds are still liquid.
So let's jump ahead to that. If we think through a normal savings account, a high yield savings account, risk-free cash, those are our starters on the playing field. When we need cash, they're ready to jump in.
Very reliable, right?
Yep, reliable, steady. They're hitting 300 or 400. Now, who is on our bench when it comes to liquidity, or who's sitting behind the scenes as a backup that can step in and play? Not all of the time, or may not be as reliable, but hey, if I need cash, there's a place for me to go get it. That's not just my bank account.
Yeah, I love the analogy you're using here. And again, it's more of thinking of a depth chart, right? If you're in some sort of team or playing some sort of sporting event. And so it's that situational player who's got a very unique style that can flourish in certain opportunities. I would say this is where we tie back into one of our most recent episodes as far as securities-backed line of credit, home equity line of credit, Roth IRA, which it's not my favorite just because it can create an auditing headache if you're taking distributions before age 59 and a half. But also I think one that's easily overlooked might be a 0% APR credit card. So think about the individual who either the HVAC went out in the middle of July and it's super hot, and maybe it's not even on your primary residence. Maybe it's on your rental property and you didn't do an adequate job of building a emergency fund for your rental specifically, right? Like that's a thing. If you're going to have an emergency fund for your personal balance sheet, why not have one for your business balance sheet? And an investment rental is a quote unquote business in my opinion. And so opening up a 0% APR credit card for 18 months, 24 months, 12 months may not be a bad option, especially if you have high credit worthiness, to make this purchase, have no interest accrue, and just figure out how to make the monthly payment based on the timeline. And if you're not going to be able to pay it off in that timeline, well, then guess what? You have the option of analyzing and discerning, does it make sense to do a balance transfer into another 0% APR credit card when this 0% is expired or has matured?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing here is the purpose of establishing and then understanding who your backup players are, just like your life events fund. It's simply buying you time to make the best decision to tackle any problem, good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't want to carry too much dead weight that's going to drag you down underwater and you not be able to come back up for air, right? And so by having these situational players, I think gives you that optionality and the flexibility to survive in advance, buy yourself some more time to get reorganized and to overcome whatever life event or curveball was thrown at you unexpectedly.
How would you rank those situational players? If I pull examples like a credit card, just month to month, a zero interest, call it 12-month credit card, and then securities-backed line of credit, home equity line of credit, perhaps even Roth IRA. Like, who would you put in the game first for a typical emergency or just typical unknown that goes beyond your rank and file starter in the life events fund?
So you're not going to like this answer, but I would say it's very situational and it depends. Reason being is because if I don't have after-tax assets that warrants having a securities-backed line of credit, well, that's not even a viable option, right? Or if I don't own a home or there's not enough equity in it that warrants me having a home equity line of credit, then that's not an option. I'd say the easiest barrier to entry is probably going to be the 0% APR credit card, assuming that you are creditworthy, that you have a decent or strong credit score. Everything after that, the Roth IRA is probably the next second easiest because a lot of people today are Roth happy. Talking heads in the media, and ever since the Roth was announced, it's just become a very hot topic because of the tax advantages that come along with it. I personally believe that a lot of people get that order of operations with when to maximize utilizing Roth out of order, but that's just my personal opinion, and maybe we can do an episode on that in itself. But I would say easiest is probably, again, 0% APR credit card, Roth IRA, and then from there it's a toss-up between the securities-backed line of credit and the home equity line of credit, depending on what your balance sheet looks like.
Sure. And if you have access to acquire a player like that, hey, if I don't have a home, that's not an option for me. So I've got to look elsewhere to put that back up on the field, or at least on the bench.
Yeah. And one I would say that we overlooked and maybe haven't mentioned yet would be a 401k loan, assuming that we have access to a 401k and that the plan document allows. There's pros and cons to it. But again, I'm a firm believer in that retirement assets are delayed gratification accounts. Let's try not to touch those to the best of our abilities outside of any sort of advantages or overall emergencies that would warrant doing so.
So we've talked about our starters. That is your cash in bank accounts, high yield savings, direct access. We've talked about our backup players, equity lines of credit, credit cards, Roth IRAs, perhaps even loans against retirement assets. I think one of the players that we haven't really mentioned, and oftentimes it's because they don't step directly onto the field, is insurance coverage or proactive insurance coverage. So talk to me about how insurance can absolutely be a component of your life events fund and its planning.
Think about how insurance fits into this, right? So again, not that the life event's going to be negative in the sense that it might be a disability or an untimely death or a lawsuit or anything like that, but more so from the sense that whenever there is some sort of risk that could arise, we have three options. If it's multiple choice, we can ignore it and continue to go on our day thinking that, hey, that's not going to happen to me, or I'm just not going to pay it any attention. If I don't look at it, it won't see me, thinking from the perspective of a child. You can budget for it, right? Also known as self-insuring. And if you know exactly what you need to budget, then it makes it a lot easier. But if it's a wide range or variable of not understanding what the cost might be or the risk might be, then it's very hard to budget. And the third one is to transfer, right? Transfer that risk to someone else, typically through the form of some sort of insurance, in exchange for some sort of premium or cost, right? And usually the cost is a fraction of the benefit that you're going to receive. Typically, not always, but typically. And so, we view that as being your financial immune system. The purpose of our immune system is to keep us safe and protect us from illness, disease, and ultimately death. And so having that strong defense, that fortitude, that moat allows us to be more aggressive on the offensive side of the ball, right? If we're going to continue on with some sort of sports analogy here. I'm a firm believer that defenses win championships and offense just puts fans in the stands, right? Some could argue that, but we're not here to talk about that. So let's
break those down. So ignore is pretty simple. Hey, a risk out there exists, right? Hey, I may be at risk for a motorcycle accident. Well, if I don't own a motorcycle and never plan to go on one, maybe that's something I ignore. I may be at risk for getting sick, just like anyone else. It's a little more likely that I come down with a sickness of some kind, and I can ignore that risk altogether and say, hey, I don't need medical coverage. I don't need disability coverage. I don't need any coverage. It's just not going to happen to me, and I'm going to hope for the best. Right? Depending on the risk, that is a choice, but for risks that exist in most people's worlds, generally a poor one. So let's break down budget versus transfer. What type of risk or life event may it make more sense for me to budget for as opposed to just simply transferring?
Yeah, let's do an easy one, right? And so an easy one would be the deductible on your health insurance, the deductible on your auto or home insurance, or even the cost of replacing your HVAC or your roof. Or if you're going to get a root canal, understanding what that cost might be, right? Or if you're going to have to go see a specialist for your back or for some sort of surgery, if your insurance doesn't cover everything, you can prepare for that and you can budget. And hopefully you're using tax advantageous, buckets or accounts like a health savings account or a flexible spending account when it comes to those medical needs from a budgetary perspective. But those are things that you can say, hey, this is the time frame. It's a known time frame when this might occur, or at least knowing that, hey, this is the cost if this occurs within this time frame based on where the prices are today.
And then it's deciding whether you're going to keep that risk on your balance sheet. Hey, I'm keeping X amount of dollars set aside to pay for this upcoming need or to pay for this unexpected need. It's part of my overall defensive plan.
Right. And I would say one event that's very hard to budget around is the loss of a job due to a sickness, injury, or illness. Another way of saying that is a disability, whether it be long-term or short-term. Right. And the reason why that's so difficult is because if something like that does occur in your life, well, we don't know how long you're going to be out of work, right? And how much income needs to be replaced. So I think that's where it becomes hard to budget for certain items. Same thing with an untimely passing of a loved one. We don't know when that untimely passing is going to occur. We know that we're all going to pass away at some time, as morbid as that sounds. But it's, okay, well, what's the timeline between now and when they were going to stop working and how much income needs to be replaced? And so for those instances, because we can't really calculate what needs to be budgeted for in the most precise manner, in my opinion, that's where transferring it to someone else may make the most sense depending on the overall cost commitment for transferring it.
I think a great example that we share with clients in some instances is, hey, I may be able to budget for an upcoming medical expense or surgery. It's going to cost me $5,000. I have a year to prepare. If I were to ask a client, let's budget for you missing 10 years of work for a sickness, an injury, or a disaster of some kind. That's when a lot of clients look at me scratching their head saying, I don't think it's going to be possible to budget for the next 10 years of my income. And even if I do that, what if it doesn't happen? And what is my money doing or how is it growing in the meantime, right? It starts to become a silly conversation.
Yeah, and I think there are ways in which we can illustrate, right? It's showing you the math of, okay, well, this is if we decide to do nothing, and this is if something occurs and we did nothing, right? Which is usually a drastic decrease in potential outcome, or maybe just complete blowing up of the financial plan altogether. But then also show them, hey, what if we did something? What if we decided we were going to transfer the risk by buying some sort of insurance, right? Some sort of safeguard, some sort of parachute that would kick in the event that we need it, but we never actually need it. Like that's best case, right? Is that we paid for it, but we never used it. And more often than not, the financial outcome is really not that different than if we would have done nothing. But what you gain is peace of mind, right? Peace of mind knowing that, hey, if something were to occur, I'm protected, I can transfer this to someone else, and I can continue on with my existing financial plan without hitting a significant, I would say, detour on where I'm ultimately wanting to be financially.
Yeah, I think an analogy we use there with many clients sometimes is if you have the best defense on the field, right? If you can put your defense into the game and you know with 99% confidence not a single touchdown or single goal is going to be scored, you can effectively take extreme offensive risk. Hey, I can throw a Hail Mary pass every time I step on the field with my offense because even if we drop the ball or turn the ball over, the defense is going to step in and effectively keep our plan in place or keep the game plan in place moving forward. And that is in some form or fashion the function of insurance. Hey, if I can get a great understanding of my outcomes, worst case scenario on the practice field, well, when it's time to step onto the game field, I can take risks with a growth focus, knowing that I'm protected. Ideally, we never have to rely on the defense that heavily, but it's there in case we do.
Yeah, and I would say because we're not always planning for the what ifs or the negative life events or the chaos that life might throw at us, it's very often hard to think about some of the right questions that need to be asked, right? Or some of the considerations that should be brought to the forefront, especially if we're a DIYer, someone who wants to do this on our own. And maybe that's one reason why you're tuning into our podcast is because, hey, you're like, I think these individuals are knowledgeable within their own right. And they share a lot of information that's insightful and that's applicable to my life. And I'm just not ready to potentially hire somebody to work with, right? I want to continue to do this on my own. And so we think it's prudent to make some sort of cash flow chaos plan. And we have a resource that we'll be happy to share with you if you reach out to us, or you can go and look for it in the show notes. That's titled, Where Should My Next Dollar Go? And it's essentially a decision tree that helps you ask the right questions to yourself or with you and your spouse, and then self-assess where you're at. And if the answer is yes, it'll show you where you should go next in your train of thought, right, from a generalized perspective. And if the answer was no, it gives you your next stopping point or the next exit that you need to take on your financial planning roadmap to say, hey, let's dedicate some time here, right? So one of the first questions it'll ask you is, are you financially secure? For example, adequate emergency fund, no high interest debt, adequate insurance, financially solvent, etc. Well, if the answer is yes, well, then it's going to take you somewhere else on your financial journey. Another consideration or another question that you should ask with trying to understand where your next hard-earned dollar should go from an army of dollar bill standpoint. Well, if the answer was no, the generalized guidance or train of thought is, okay, well, maybe you should consider bolstering your emergency funds, paying off those additional debts that have high interest, or even increasing your insurance coverages. It's so basic, but often overlooked.
And I think the challenge is the question that gets asked. A lot of times the answer is, I don't know. Right? How often are you looking at all of your insurance policies? Weekly? Monthly? I think most of our clients look at their insurance policies the day they buy them, and then that's it, and nothing ever gets looked at again. So it can be challenging to step in and say, hey, since I bought the policy 3 years ago, or since the last time I've built a true emergency fund formula and plan, has my life changed at all? Like, what does that look like for me, and how do I need to consider additional changes here before even moving on to the next question?
Yeah, a great consideration that's often overlooked is like, hey, if I've been focused on diligently paying down high interest debt, and I've done an excellent job based on the game plan, I've been committed, I've been disciplined, but now I have an extra $650 or $1,000. Guess what? That's money that you were used to living without in your budget because it was going to these debt providers. Now you can just automatically commit to putting that to savings, or at least a large portion of it, 50% at the minimum, towards building wealth, building fortitude, and the rest can go towards your lifestyle, right? Or other areas of your balance sheet or other goals you might have. So I think that's where sitting down and designing some sort of cash flow chaos plan makes a whole lot of sense. And then building a roadmap with, hey, these are the areas in which every dollar should be contributed towards based on my personal goals and the things that I want to work towards. Now, another thing that I think is worth looking into from a cash flow chaos plan is just understanding that, hey, if it hits the fan unexpectedly, and maybe it's just too many life events at once for us to be able to service all of them, what are those initial quick cuts that we're going to make in our daily lives that are going to help us survive in advance until maybe the turbulence on the flight goes away, or maybe the waves out at sea start to calm? I think this is where it helps from building a budget perspective, to where you identify easily, well, these are discretionary expenses and these are non-discretionary. Another way of saying that is that, hey, these are our wants, these are our needs. From a wants perspective, these are the things that provide more comfort to our daily lives, but are not required to sustain life.
Yep. It's just really about evaluating, what does it cost to actually live and run my life versus what does it cost to truly enjoy the life that I'm living? And how am I going to build a contingency plan or a life events plan to address both sides of that coin, right? For someone who has dependents, who maintains a higher lifestyle, and they want that to continue in the event of uncertainty, that could lead to, right, encouragement to keep a larger life events fund. Whereas an individual who has clearly defined and dictated, hey, this is what I need, and if life has to change given an unforeseen circumstance, I can keep a smaller life events fund in that instance because, hey, I know exactly what I'm going to cut and when it's going to happen.
Right. No, absolutely. This leads into just making sure that if you are married, that you are at least having this conversation, or if you have a significant other or domestic partner, that you're having this conversation ongoing and checking in and reviewing, because you want to stress test this plan. Now, why specifically? Well, specifically because what if there's one of those moments where one of you is unavailable because of the type of life event that has occurred, right? Whether it's an untimely passing, which people experience, whether it's a short-term or long-term disability because one of you became too sick or injured to go back to work, or maybe you're needing care, or maybe both of you are having to leave work, one to help support and manage the other. And so you need to be aware of what that game plan looks like and what protocols have been put in place up to this point.
Sure. The example I use, if I bring it back to sports again, is the assistant coach, or call it the co-head coach. Having a plan as the assistant coach is meaningless if the assistant coach doesn't know what the plan is. Right? If the head coach is steering the ship and putting the right players on the field and organizing the game plan, and the head coach either gets thrown out of the game or unexpectedly leaves the game, if the assistant coach doesn't know the order of operations, the right players, even that are on the field, and the right players to put in as backups, right, the plan falls apart pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially in an emotional time, if it's one of those examples.
Yeah, I can just think about the get back coach where, there's a bad call on the field and the head coach is just, getting after the refs and going too far out on the field. And you just see that one coach who's just like grabbing them by their pant loop, their belt, and just like pulling them back to keep them from getting thrown out so that they're not having to go in to make those calls. No, and a good reference would be if you go back and listen to episode number 2 titled 5 Financial To-Dos Before Saying I Do, right? And again, when it comes to building out that team or that accountability partner, or even just trying to level up as a household, as a couple financially, stress testing, I think, is very prudent on a recurring basis, whether it's every 6 months or even once a year.
And I think it's important to note that stress test could be just as much as what is our red zone or red flag order of operations. If we need a large sum of cash now, where are we going to get it from? I may go to my high yield savings account first, and then I may go to my securities backed line of credit second, and then home equity line of credit third. It's great if both partners know that information, but a large component of any contingency plan or stress test plan can also be really the who, not how, right? Hey, if my spouse does not know the intricate details of our plan, but she has a resource, a financial advisor, a planner that she can call and say, what's the plan? That is just as much stress testing the overall plan of action in the event of an uncertainty. There's huge value in that as well.
No, correct. Well, one thing we want to do before we wrap things up is we want to provide you with a couple of resources. So again, one of the resources we talked about today was the decision tree that we can offer up entitled Where Should My Next Dollar Go? Right? This is a great resource and a good starting point for, again, the DIYers or someone who just wants to compare notes with how maybe their financial advisor has been advising them on how to put their army of dollar bills to work. Another would be, don't be afraid to leverage, online sites like NerdWallet, right? It's a great resource from a personal finance perspective. And one of the links that we can put in the show notes is the 5 best savings accounts of July 2025 when this is being recorded, up to 4.66%, right? And so it gives you the top 5 bank accounts that you can look into. Now, we're not recommending any of these. And so usually if clients ask us where, we'll give them our own personal experience with where we bank or where other clients have banked, but we're not giving them a direct recommendation because clients need to do a little bit of their own due diligence and research as well. One thing I do want to emphasize, though, is that the purpose of an emergency fund is the reliability and the quick access. It's not the interest that you're going to earn on it. I think that's often something that gets misprioritized. Is too often individuals are like, well, if the high yield savings account isn't offering enough interest, then I'm not going to do it, right? And so, again, the purpose of the funds are to be there in a reliable manner when we need it. The interest, in my mind, is the cherry on top. It's the benefit of doing business. And so that's where maybe segmenting it between a low interest account for a portion and for the bulk of it being in a high yield savings account. Because again, it's always nice to have the extra toppings on top, but they're not a necessity to enjoy the dessert.
And one additional resource that we have and oftentimes share with clients we'll include in the show notes. It's titled, What Issues Should I Consider When Establishing and Maintaining My Emergency Fund? So I think one of the benefits of this resource is, it's as Michael, you mentioned, asking yourself the right questions can very well guide you to the artistic design of what your life events fund or emergency fund should look like. So this resource does a fantastic job of asking questions like, hey, are the majority of my emergency funds held in the bank or elsewhere? Do I have access to a health savings account or benefits through work that provide additional liquidity or resources? Do I have adequate insurance coverage, life and disability that replace at least some degree of my income? Right? All questions that clients can ask themselves and begin to point towards, do I need an emergency fund or an emergency fund plan? Or do I need to better bolster or review what that plan is?
Well, Brady, that was great. I think we offered a lot of insights and a lot of resources and excited to see the feedback that we get with this episode. But here's the deal. Emergencies don't make appointments. They just show up and expect you to pay the bill.
Exactly. But with the right strategy, that bill doesn't have to derail your entire financial plan. Preparedness is the antidote to panic.
If you're not sure how ready you actually are, it might be time for a financial fortitude checkup. You can connect with us and even submit your questions at www.genesiswealthplanning.com/AMA.
And in the meantime, stay grounded, stay prepared, and as always, keep building your financial fortitude.
Are you considering hiring a financial advisor? If so, be sure to listen to episode 1 of Financial Fortitude. In this episode, we discuss the reasons why many people choose to hire a financial advisor and highlight the key qualities you should look for in the financial professional you decide to work with. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Genesis Wealth Planning LLC, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. All scenarios and names mentioned herein are purely fictional and have been created solely for educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing situations, persons, or fictional characters is coincidental. The information presented should not be used as the basis for any specific investment advice. Michael Acosta and Brady Hammerly are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. Securities, products, and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representatives of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Consolidated Planning Group, Inc. and Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Michael Acosta's California Insurance License Number 0M50974 and Brady Hammerly's California Insurance License Number 4353077. 7237198.14, expiration 827.